The film begins by showing a man who comes to tow the broken-down car of his customer. His name is Bradley, who has long worked as a mechanic there. Yet that day, the boss was apparently already waiting with an unusual gesture. The boss then said that the difficult economy forced him to cut costs. Bradley immediately understood that today he had to lose his job. He then packed all his belongings while still trying to remain mature. His co-worker promised that he would surely be called back if the shop needed a worker. Bradley only agreed, knowing that such words were nothing but empty talk. Afterward, Bradley went home to ease his mind in the arms of his lover. But from a distance, his wife could be seen hastily fixing her hair. Suspicious, Bradley came closer and found a mark of a kiss on her neck. His wife, named Lauren, could no longer deny that she had been unfaithful while her husband was at work. Holding back his heartbreak, Bradley ordered her to get inside the house immediately. He then hurt himself as an outlet for his anger. On that unlucky day, Bradley did not want to make matters worse. He asked his wife calmly about what she had done. Lauren revealed that she had been lonely because Bradley always came home late at night. She also suspected that her husband had fallen back into the bad habits of his past. Yet in truth, Bradley had no choice but to come home late because of the demands of work. As the head of the household, Bradley then invited Lauren to start everything over again. That is, by trying to have a child again after once suffering a miscarriage. For the time being, he would work for Gil, who was a dealer. Since that old line of work was the only option he could take. Several months later, Bradley was already serving as a distributor. He went to an apartment and handed over a package of illicit goods. The transaction went smoothly since he was already experienced. Though in fact he always felt guilty whenever he saw addicts on the street. From his earnings, Bradley bought a new house in anticipation of his beloved child. His wife was 6 months pregnant and only waiting for the birth. Therefore Lauren was forbidden to do heavy activities so that the baby would remain safe. Bradley had even prepared a crib because he was so impatient. As the two were about to be intimate, Bradley suddenly received a phone call to come to the headquarters immediately. He then set off right away without delay. His boss, who was the dealer named Gil, then greeted him. They were about to receive visitors from Mexico to make a deal. Moments later, the guest named Eliezer arrived with 2 of his men. They were named Pedro and Roman, who would be sent on a mission together. But Bradley instantly refused because he suspected that Roman was still under the influence of narcotics. Eliezer denied it and said that he guaranteed both were clean and trustworthy. Unfortunately, Bradley still wasn't convinced, so Gil pulled him aside to talk. In private, Gil emphasized that the pickup of this large shipment had to be carried out. In return, Bradley would be given 3 months off when his baby was born. At last, an agreement was reached on the condition that Bradley himself would lead them. That night, Bradley could feel the movement in his wife's belly. Only 90 days remained until their child would be born into the world. When the day came, Bradley together with Roman and Pedro carried out their mission. The 3 went to a dock to collect the secret delivery. The boat was then sent off into the pitch-black sea. Pedro then dove at the designated spot and released the crate from its weight. Several bags of narcotics were successfully retrieved just as planned. Yet upon returning to the dock, Bradley, who had a bad feeling, decided to dump his package. Unfortunately, Eliezer's 2 men refused to obey and still drove out onto the highway. Not long after, police cars arrived, surrounding them. Bradley was then forced to take out both men in order to keep the cartel's secrecy intact. As both sides clashed, Bradley suddenly shot Pedro from behind. He then immediately leapt into the sea to avoid Roman's attack. Meanwhile, the police continued to launch assaults to subdue the criminals. Roman also refused to surrender even though he had to fight alone. In secret, Bradley climbed back up and quickly targeted Roman. Yet his bullets were finished, so he instantly resorted to striking. Unfortunately, the police instantly surrounded him and ordered him to raise his hands. At the police station afterward, Bradley was already handcuffed in a room. An investigator said that he had seen all the recordings of the incident. Bradley's act of killing his own comrades showed that he was no ordinary man. Therefore, the investigator asked him to reveal the name of his boss in exchange for leniency. but Bradley insisted that he was not interested in discounts or offers. After the investigator left, Lauren then arrived full of worry. Bradley asked her not to attend the trial. He would accept whatever the court decided, which might be 4 years of imprisonment. Hearing this made Lauren even sadder and gloomier. She promised to visit as often as possible with their beloved child. Yet once again, Bradley forbade it since he did not want his child to know him as a criminal. In the end, Lauren said she would faithfully wait for him until he gained freedom. But on the day of the trial, Bradley actually received a shocking verdict. He was sentenced by the court to 7 years in prison. With a heavy heart, Bradley was then transferred to the penitentiary along with the other inmates. He tried to remain polite even while suppressing anger and disappointment. The new prisoners lined up to hand over their belongings. So did Bradley, who surrendered everything except his wedding ring. He wanted to keep wearing it as a reminder of hope and love. But the guard did not care since every inmate was forbidden to wear any jewelry at all. Bradley's insistence made the guard upset, so he was ordered to repeat the line again. After going through various procedures, Bradley was finally welcomed by an old inmate. He was a senior prisoner named Lefty who had been locked up there for 28 years. Lefty said that the cell Bradley would occupy was a special single-person cell. Thus, he could avoid conflicts and useless fights. Moments later, the two arrived at the corridor of cells supervised by a guard. The warden then explained the rules Bradley had to obey under his command. That he must already be standing in front of the door whenever the prison bell rang. Because if he was late, then all the inmates would have to keep waiting for who knows how long. Which in turn could cause him to be hated by the other prisoners. Once inside the cell, Bradley could only rage in frustration at the injustice he had received. Now his simple dream of merely being a good husband and father had instantly vanished. Yet no matter what, he had to keep fighting for the sake of his child. When night fell, Bradley suddenly woke to shouts from outside. The inmates had already been lined up and were waiting only for him. Bradley, being late, was then warned not to repeat the mistake again. Meanwhile, at her home, Lauren also awoke to a startling noise. A shadow briefly flickered by in a suspicious way. Lauren immediately grabbed a gun and prepared to strike. But suddenly the window glass shattered, causing her to fire blindly. A dart filled with tranquilizer instantly struck her, making her lose consciousness. When morning came, Bradley was escorted by Lefty to meet a lawyer. He was then informed that Lauren's obstetrician had just sent a message about her condition. Namely, that a complication had occurred with their baby. Hearing this, Bradley became deeply worried and shocked. The lawyer then said that afterward the doctor would meet with him. Not long after, Bradley was called from his cell to go to the visitation room. Yet the one who came was a man who turned out to be Eliezer's messenger. He said that Bradley's betrayal had caused millions of dollars in losses. Therefore, Bradley had to make restitution if he did not want his wife's pregnancy to be terminated. That is, by killing a prisoner inside Redleaf Prison, which was known to be strict and deadly. To do so, Bradley first had to cause trouble here so that he would be transferred. Afterward, Bradley was escorted by the warden back into confinement. Without a word, he immediately attacked and beat him mercilessly. He had to be deemed dangerous enough to be transferred to the intended prison. He even broke the warden's arm without the slightest mercy. Moments later, the arriving guards became furious. Bradley was then taken to the lower floor to be punished. Yet without fear, he once again raged with full strength. At last, the wardens ganged up on him and electrocuted him until he passed out. Soon after, Bradley was transferred to Redleaf, which was known as the graveyard of prisoners, where the guards were fully armed to kill anyone who resisted. The chief warden, named Warden, then welcomed him and gave a warning that in this prison there was no such thing as human rights or rules. Therefore, Bradley was free to cause chaos if he wanted to meet his end quickly. Warden then ordered all of the prisoners' belongings to be discarded, as if to provoke him. Bradley could only stay silent as he watched his ring lying on the asphalt. After being inspected, Bradley was taken to his cell at the corner of the prison complex. His room was so filthy and disgusting, like an animal's cage. He had to cover his nose to avoid the stench of a toilet full of waste. Not long after, the guards woke Bradley up to go to the prison yard. In the corner of the field, a group of senior inmates could be seen exercising. Bradley, who tried to approach, was stopped by other prisoners, because he would surely be beaten if he tried to disturb them. In private, Bradley then asked where cell block number 99 was located, for his target, named Christopher, was being held there. The prisoner said that the complex was reserved only for dangerous inmates, meaning Bradley had to prove himself worthy in order to be transferred there. Without waiting any longer, Bradley then stood and approached the inmates in the corner of the yard. The conversation among them instantly turned into a brutal brawl. One by one, the senior prisoners were beaten by him until they were helpless. Unfortunately, moments later, a warning shot was suddenly fired, forcing Bradley to stop his action. The guards then ordered them to face the wall if they did not want to lose their lives. But one remaining inmate refused to accept it and suddenly attacked again. Bradley swiftly defended himself and immediately killed him. On alert, the guards approached while pointing their weapons. But once again, Bradley went on a rampage until finally Warden arrived. As punishment, Bradley was then taken with his head covered through a secret door. They would transfer him to cell block number 99, which was the prison within the prison. He was then dropped into a room filled with torture devices. The guards then strapped on an electric belt that could be activated with a remote at any time.
One of these.
Afterward, Bradley was escorted into the basement toward his cell, where his chamber was completely enclosed and its floor was covered with broken glass. Warden once again shocked him, causing Bradley's knees to be injured. Meanwhile, in a warehouse, Lauren, who was being held captive, was visited by the old messenger of Eliezer, who, it turned out, had brought along an abortion specialist from South Korea. Knowing this, Lauren became extremely terrified. From a small hole in his cell door, Bradley shouted Christopher's name loudly. But another prisoner said that no inmate with that name existed. Bradley, confused, was suddenly shocked by his belt. A guard then came and ordered him to step out. Without mercy, the guard electrocuted Bradley repeatedly until he fell to the floor. After being satisfied, he was then dragged to meet a guest at the end of the room, which turned out to be Eliezer along with Roman and several inmates. Bradley had apparently been tricked by the dealer so that revenge could be taken. The guard then handed over the remote and asked that he not be killed just yet. In a threatening tone, Eliezer said that Bradley's betrayal had cost him $3 million. His younger sister also had to become a widow because Pedro had been shot in the back. Eliezer then pressed the remote, and Roman dropped him to the ground. A photo of Lauren being held captive was then shown to keep him in line. Seeing this, Bradley grew angry and slowly rose once more. Eliezer warned that if he dared to fight back, then the life of his baby would be at stake. At last, Bradley was shocked again and beaten until he passed out. Moments later, the guards dragged Bradley's body down the prison corridor. In his unconscious state, he muttered apologies to his wife. But suddenly he was shocked again, waking up instantly. A guard then came and delivered food to the condemned inmates. While regaining his strength, an old prisoner across the corridor started talking to Bradley. He said that he had been locked up here for 8 years without anyone ever visiting him. The confession made Bradley feel fortunate because he still had family. While chatting, Bradley secretly removed the soles from his shoes. He then tucked them against his back to block the electric current from the torture belt. All of this chaos had to end, even if it cost him his life. The next day, already prepared, Bradley was called out by 2 guards. When the remote was pressed, he pretended to be in pain as usual. Then suddenly, Bradley attacked and struck both of them down. A frightened guard hid himself inside a prison cell. The muzzle of his weapon that peeked out was instantly kicked with all Bradley's strength. With one hostage inside the cell, Bradley ordered the other guard to hand over the prison keys. But suddenly the hostage tried to escape, so he slammed the door shut immediately. The remaining guard was also taken hostage, along with the corpse of his partner. After all his shackles were removed, Bradley walked straight toward Eliezer's room. A kung fu fighter then welcomed him with a barrage of attacks. Not long after, Bradley managed to bring the opponent down. He immediately killed him without mercy. With the awakening of his monstrous spirit, Bradley turned his gaze to the dealer's 2 henchmen. One by one, he dealt with them using all his strength. He no longer cared about anything except the safety of his beloved family, which could only be achieved if he killed every last one of them. At last, Bradley stomped on Roman's head until it burst apart. In the remaining moment, Eliezer quickly contacted his men. He instructed them to prepare to kill the hostage. But Bradley, fearless, instantly struck him and seized the phone. He declared that if his wife was not released, then everyone would have to die together. Without mercy, Bradley then struck Eliezer down and broke his leg. Stammering in pain, Eliezer was forced to reveal the code to his phone. Bradley then quickly made a call while dragging the dealer's body toward his cell. Until at last, Eliezer, unwilling to die, agreed to have the hostage released.
Plans have changed.
After handcuffing the last remaining guard, Bradley brought Eliezer inside. But moments later, Warden and his forces arrived. Bradley then threatened that all hostages would die if they opened the gate. The chief warden did not want to act recklessly and instead chose to play along. Bradley also promised that he would surrender after ensuring his wife's safety. As Bradley requested, Lauren was escorted to Gil's house to be released. At the end of the street, Gil was already waiting in full alert. Lauren was then handed over, and the car slowly backed away. Once at a distance, Gil drew his weapon and fired a shot, which was immediately answered by Lauren's own retaliatory gunfire. Moments later, Bradley finally received the news with tears welling in his eyes. He realized that today would be his final conversation. Yet no words of farewell could he utter except for a stream of tears. He only left a message to his unborn child to take care of their mother. The call was then ended, for he had to once again face the world. Before surrendering himself, Bradley asked for a moment to finish his business. He then approached Eliezer, who could only beg for mercy. Bradley stomped his head repeatedly until it plunged into the toilet hole. Not long after, Warden finally ordered Bradley to raise his hands. Slowly, he cocked his pistol and executed the prisoner.